events have to do with that territory. Still, there is tremendous cultural heritage back from the Russian America. For example, Orthodox churches and a lot of more than 700 geographical names of Russian origin. During the Second World War, it was here in Alaska that was the origin of the legendary air bridge for the supply of military aircraft and other equipment under the Lend-Lease program. It was a dangerous and treacherous route over the vast emptiness of ice. However, the pilots of both countries did everything to bring closer the victory. They risked their lives and they gave it all for the common victory. I was just in the city of Magadan in Russia, and there is a memorial there dedicated to the Russian and the U.S. pilots. And there are two flags, the U.S. flag and the Russian flag. And I know that here as well there is such a memorial. There is a military burial place several kilometers away from here. The Soviet pilots that buried there who died during that dangerous mission. We're thankful to the citizens and the government of the U.S. for carefully taking care of their memory. I think that's very worthy and noble. We'll always remember other historical examples when our countries defeated common enemies together in the spirit of battle camaraderie and allyship that supported each other and facilitated each other. I'm sure that this heritage will help us rebuild and foster mutually beneficial and equal ties at this new stage, even during the hardest conditions. It is known that there have been no summits between Russia and the U.S. for 4 years, and that's a long time. This time was very hard for bilateral relations, and let's be frank, they've fallen to the lowest point since the Cold War. I think that's not benefiting our countries and the world as a whole. It is apparent that sooner or later, we had to amend the situation to move on from the confrontation to dialogue. And in this case, a personal meeting between the heads of state has been long overdue. Naturally, under the condition of serious and painstaking work, this work has been done in general. Me and President Trump have very good direct contact. We've spoken multiple times. We spoke frankly on the phone. And special envoy of the President, Mr. Witkoff, traveled out to Russia several times. Our advisors and heads of foreign ministries kept in touch all the time. And you know fully well that one of the central issues was the situation around Ukraine. We see the strive of the administration and President Trump personally to help facilitate the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. And his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand this history, is precious. As I've said, the situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation, however strange it may sound in these conditions. We have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us, a terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict, and we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we are prepared to work on that. I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine. We expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress. Incidentally, when the new administration came to power, bilateral trade started to grow. It's still very symbolic. Still, we have a growth of 20%. As I've said, we have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that the U.S. and Russian investment and business cooperation has tremendous potential. Russia and the U.S. can offer each other so much in trade, digital, high-tech, and in space exploration. We see that Arctic cooperation is also very possible. And our international context, for example, between the Far East of Russia and the West Coast of the U.S. Overall, it's very important for our countries to turn the page, to go back to cooperation. It is symbolic that not far away from here, the border between Russia and the U.S., there is a so-called international date line. I think you can step over, literally, from yesterday into tomorrow. And I hope that we'll succeed in that. In political sphere, I would like to thank President Trump for our joint work, for the well-wishing and trustworthy tone of our conversation. It's important that both sides are result-oriented, and we see that the President of the U.S. has a very clear idea of what he would like to achieve. He sincerely cares about the prosperity of his nation. Still, he understands that Russia has its own national interests. I expect that today's agreements will be the starting point, not only for the solution of the Ukrainian issue, but also will help us bring back business-like and pragmatic relations between Russia and the U.S. And in the end, I would like to add one more thing. I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities. And I said it quite directly back then that it's a big mistake. Today, when President Trump is saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good, business-like and trustworthy contact. And I have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come, and the sooner the better, to the end of the conflict in Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound. And I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Radcliffe, thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think, you know, everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time, and we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with. We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. We had many tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax. It made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all, but we had to put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax, but what was done was very criminal. But it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all of the things that we'd like to have dealt with. But we'll have a good chance when this is over. So just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, whose faces, who I know in many cases, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss. but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good productive meetings over the years, and we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Down, please, sir, down. Down, please, thank you, thank you.
They are moving the pool from their Russian pool out. All the properties of the advocates, because I can see them all moving. U.S. pool. Down.
Down, down, down. Down, down.
he is serious about achieving peace in Ukraine. Margaret, as you said, if this is all that happens, if this statement is it, there aren't going to be further meetings, there aren't going to be further briefings, et cetera. It was a whole lot of to do about nothing.
But we had heard from the president he'd know in the first 2 minutes, John, whether a deal was possible. They talked for two and a half hours or more. And I don't know the answer to this.
Right. We certainly didn't get the answer to that from what we just saw. You can imagine a range of possibilities. One is, as the president said, no, there isn't a deal until there's a deal, which is to say nothing is decided until everything's decided, to use another political phrase. So it could be thorny issues to go, but they made progress. One thing that hasn't yet happened is Vladimir Putin got the extremely warm welcome, and he got the very cordial treatment by the president, as Margaret outlined, in this experience that took place in front of the press. We don't dare call it a press conference. What didn't yet happen, I don't think, is President Trump did not repeat some of the talking points that Vladimir Putin has offered about who started the war, that kind of thing. And that was, in terms of the fears, Ambassador Sullivan, that the Europeans would have had. First of all, what's your interpretation of how they read this? But also, they were worried that he would come out with an agreement, President Trump would agree to something that really put Ukraine in a bad position. That has not yet happened.
Sure. So the downside, the major downside has been avoided. But if we take President Trump at his word that he would know in the first few minutes whether President Putin was serious about peace, the fact that they met for 2.5, maybe 3 hours, and now have this press conference, is that an indication that President Trump believes that Vladimir Putin is seriously interested in peace in Ukraine? I've seen no evidence to support that proposition. It may be the president's intuition, but there's no evidence to support that. In fact, all the evidence is to the contrary.
And we want to bring back into the conversation CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd. Sam, President Trump has been speaking quite a lot about what he wanted out of this meeting today. He said there would be big consequences if Vladimir Putin didn't do what he wanted. And we know that was ceasefire. So we heard nothing about consequences for failing to achieve either. It's hard to know if this was a way of avoiding saying, I can't get a deal here, or is something else? Is there a strategy that you can discern from this?
I can't quite discern a strategy. Ending a war certainly does take time, which is something that President Trump did not seem to recognize on the campaign trail over the last few months when he said he could end this war quickly. And I agree wholeheartedly with Ambassador Sullivan that this was a nothing burger when it comes to a ceasefire arrangement for Ukraine, but it wasn't a nothing burger when it comes to Vladimir Putin's objectives more broadly. Vladimir Putin got the red carpet welcome in Alaska, and as you just articulated, Margaret, no new sanctions have been announced on Russia. We heard nothing about additional secondary tariffs, for example, on China, the largest customer of Russian oil. And so Vladimir Putin has successfully continued the stalling game that he's been playing for months, in which President Trump threatens to punish Putin even more strongly than the current architecture, and then Putin moves the goalposts yet again. So that's a big takeaway for me from this summit. Vladimir Putin walks away having met some of his objectives, while the fighting continues on in Ukraine, and this war of attrition, which Putin is very willing to continue fighting, is ongoing. We heard nothing about any kind of stall in fighting whatsoever. So I do think Vladimir Putin is walking away from this summit feeling like he scored some major wins.
Well, one of the things Vladimir Putin said in his remarks that were translated was, I hope the Europeans won't torpedo our nascent progress. And he talked about Russia as if it were the victim here, as if it didn't launch that full-scale invasion in 2022, and as if it didn't start the invasion back in 2014. As to your point there, Sam, as you're talking about shaping narrative and Vladimir Putin walking away looking as if he's achieved something, those assertions by him were not challenged by President Trump.
And it brings to mind, of course, the instance in which President Trump did challenge assertions when Volodymyr Zelensky was in the Oval Office. He left him no quarter when he suggested, from hard-won experience, that Vladimir Putin couldn't be trusted, a position that President Trump then later came to, publicly expressing his disappointment with President Putin for having constantly told him or appeared to be moving towards a peace and then increasing the bombing. But there was fact-checking, to use a term from our business, in the meeting with Zelensky. Nothing of that today.
And there was immediate consequence. There was that shutoff for a brief period of time of U.S. intelligence sharing and military aid for Volodymyr Zelensky. We have not heard consequence here. There is, over in the Capitol, a big sanctions bill teed up, ready to go as soon as President Trump says go, that would have the weight of law behind it, but it would hit China, someone President Trump's trying to negotiate with. It would do other things that hurt Russia. There are tools he could use if he wanted to.
Let's bring in senior foreign correspondent Deborah Patta. Deborah, how do you think Volodymyr Zelensky is receiving what we just watched and or other European leaders?
Well, interestingly, John, there's been no word from President Zelensky up until now. He's probably waiting for that call from President Trump to hear exactly what it is that they discussed. And he said, interestingly, in his remarks, that he was going to take this to the European leaders and to Zelensky to see what they thought of it, that ultimately it would be up to them to decide. Before this summit began, Zelensky did comment, and very interestingly, he reminded the world of the most important thing as far as Ukraine is concerned, that this war continues, that there were strikes today in Sumy, he said, in Dnipro, in Zaporizhia, and also in Kherson, that the war has not stopped. He reminded everyone that Ukraine is ready to work productively to end the war, but that they are counting on a strong position from America. Everything Zelensky said before this meeting will depend on America. The Russians factor in American strength, he said, make no mistake. They're going to continue coordinating with their partners in Europe and preparing for an upcoming discussion, and that Russia must end the war. That is the constant refrain that you hear from Ukraine, and nothing has really changed there. And I think that President Zelensky will think that this is probably what he expected. They didn't have very high hopes for this. They've been dealing with President Putin for this entire duration, more than 3.5 years of war and prior to that. And this is something that they weren't even considering.
CBS 19 Weather and Weather app are sponsored by Baylor Scott & White Texas Spine and Joint Hospital.
Freelance writer Joe Lansdale discusses life after cataract surgery at Lehman Eye Center.
Before surgery, I was hoping to be able to see better so I could continue to read and write comfortably. The day after the surgery, I was working and I reached up to take off my glasses and realized I didn't have them on. That's when I knew I had a good deal. I feel more successful, because I can see clearer. And that, man, believe me, that's an important thing.
Lehman Eye Center, where seeing is believing.
Think Don's TV and Appliance for the largest in-stock selection of GE appliances anywhere in East Texas. From top load to front load to the all-new all-in-one profile laundry units to refrigerators to dishwashers and garage-ready upright freezers, all in stock and ready to roll. Emergency next-day delivery available on all refrigerators and freezers purchased at Don's. And ask about Don's 12 months